Once upon a time, video games didn't have tutorials. This is because controllers only had about 4 to 8 buttons and came with these things called instruction manuals. Believe it or not, people actually used to read these things. They had information about the game's story, instructions on how to play the game, information on the world, enemies, tools, and pretty art. But at some point, companies started putting less effort into their manuals. First, they started putting them in black and white, then they removed the information about the game world, and sometimes all you have is a controller map or the warranty information. It's kind of one of those chicken or the egg deals, where people either stopped reading the manuals first, or the manuals started to suck first. Or perhaps it was just because games are now more sophisticated that developers were able to put the instructions in the game, allowing the user to learn as they played the game. So one minute you could be wandering Rivendell and then, oh hey, look, someone's talking to me. Someone's trying to tell me how to look at them and talk to them with certain button combinations, and oh look at that. I could just talk to this little fairy girl by using the button combinations, and she's still talking to me. And she's going to teach me how to do this? Isn't this just what I did? Why is she telling me how to do it again? Why is she telling me how to do something that I just did and clearly already know? Why is she still talking? In-game tutorials have developed a bit of a bad reputation for delivering walls of text or starting games off too slowly. This is a bit unfair though, as in recent years developers have gotten a lot better at teaching players the basic mechanics of their games within the game. As an example, Brutal Legend still delivers screens of text to the player, but they managed to color it up with some flavor that appeals to the world and its sense of humor. While the game mechanics may also be introduced slowly, developer Double Fine also takes care to work these mechanics in with the story. The player gets to know their in-game avatar, Eddie Riggs, while also having the chance to soak in the strange and wondrous heavy metal-inspired world.
Aha! I knew it! Big ugly demon.
Other games try to deliver this information via the narrative, so you at least feel as if you're a part of the game's world and are pushing the story forward. Call of Duty 2 introduces you to the basic concept of the game as a new recruit to the Russian army, and illustrates how desperate their situation was during World War II by removing any sign of actual training facilities or equipment.
Why are we using potatoes instead of real grenades? Because real...
This is then followed up by a combat scenario that drops the player into action immediately, while also teaching them the basic structure of a mission. Go to objectives, use smoke grenades, crouch, plant explosives. You're taught all the basic information you'll need in the game while being dropped into the action early on. Nier takes a similar approach with very different execution. With an emphasis on the story, the game opens up in a post-apocalyptic setting where all we know is this father is looking out for his daughter, and for some reason he is none too pleased with these books in his possession. This doesn't stop him from making a deal with one of these books, which grants him power that makes the oncoming foes easy to deal with. Instead of focusing on the basics of the game, Nier's tutorial introduces a variety of powerful abilities that will be gained later on, providing the player with an idea of what shape the combat will eventually take at later stages of the game. Halo Combat Evolved and Gears of War take the thematic approach, but include the option to skip the tutorial for experienced players. Halo will only go through the tutorial on normal or easy difficulty, and multiple moments in the first level will play out differently in order to teach the player the flanking strategies and basic mechanics. Gears of War allows the player to choose training or combat on each difficulty. If they choose training, they'll be slowly introduced to the basics of combat and mostly safe encounters instead of the more combat-intensive alternative, which expects the player to know how to play the game. While all of these advancements in friendly game design are great, there is nothing better than what I like to call a silent tutorial. These are lessons the game conveys through the environment and observable mechanics rather than walls of text or long speeches. To illustrate my point, I have 3 different games that do an excellent job of teaching the player without breaking suspension of disbelief or disengaging the player from the experience. Rats play a pretty significant role in Dishonored. They're the cause of Dunwall's plague. The more people you kill, the more swarms of them litter the streets, and they'll also devour dead bodies and attack anyone that comes near. Your first introduction to this vicious nature follows Corvo's escape from prison. The game forces you up to a safe location, making sure you get to see the horde of rats as a pair of guards unwittingly open a door and meet their demise. The Pack of Pestilence makes short work of the duo and showcase just how dangerous these creatures are. Shortly thereafter, the player comes across yet another swarm of rats, only this time without the protection of a gate or cage. The only thing that saves the player is a corpse on the ground, demonstrating that the rats will always go after a corpse before a living human. Next, the player stumbles upon a large room in the sewer where guards are dumping some bodies from above. The player clearly gets a chance to see that the cadavers are on an elevated platform above a swarm of rats. Knowing that rats will always go after a corpse, this suggests that there is safety in heights. Once the player steps down, the rats will attack, forcing the player to climb to safety with the dead. The mental calculation is almost instant as the player observes their surroundings, seeing where they need to go and understanding the steps on how to get there. Use the bodies to create a distraction so the player has time to escape this room. The game never provided the player instruction. There is never a voice in your ear or a note set to the side describing how the player should toss a body out to distract the rats. It was all conveyed visually, with the game explaining its mechanics through demonstration, first in safety, then by slowly increasing the risk. Explosive barrels are no stranger to the shooter genre, especially in the Doom games. That didn't stop id from carefully crafting their maps to make sure a player would recognize these flammable containers of destruction. Before the game goes all chaos and terror, there are several of these barrels placed in well-lit areas where they are very pronounced against the background. The player even gets a chance to get up close to them to read the warning signs and symbols, and if they happen to miss all of those, the lights go out just as they're about to approach one of these explosives. The first time the player turns on their flashlight, they'll see one of the barrels with its flammable warning displayed prominently. Oddly enough, most of these barrels are not placed in strategic spots. When all hell literally breaks loose, the player is forced to handle these monsters by the simple means of shooting them in the face. It isn't until one imp in particular climbs right next to an explosive that the player is first able to make use of this strategy. In other words, the game calls your attention to the barrel by simultaneously calling attention to the foe, counting on the player to make the connection between this moment and what they've been seeing throughout the entire opening of the game. As a small bonus, Doom 3 also introduces the concept of the trap by baiting the players with a shotgun and armor bonus before dropping them into a tight-knit area full of zombies. This not only demonstrates how useful a shotgun is in close proximity, but also programs paranoia and suspicion of power-ups into the player as early as possible. Holy crap. As far as opening a game goes, Dead Space 2 takes the cake. You're stuck in a straitjacket as all hell breaks loose around you with no means of fighting back, yet the game makes sure you know exactly where it is you have to go. They know just where to stick obstacles and place enemies in order to steer the player in the right direction. All the while, the player's too busy in a mental panic like, holy shit, get me the f*** out of here. That's not why I'm discussing Dead Space 2 here, though. That's not a tutorial after all, but a combination of excellent design elements. What Dead Space 2 does that is amazing is teaching you the nature of power nodes in as few words as possible. The game makes sure you find at least one power node in an obvious spot before reaching a workbench, which is where you learn the basics of upgrading your weapons. An overzealous first-timer will immediately spend all their power nodes without a second thought. Now, this power bench is right next to a store, which is very important to keep in mind. Right after you leave the power bench and walk through a hallway, the player comes across a door. However, they can't get through it without a power node to unlock it. Oh no! But the player just spent their last one! Well, lucky for them, there's a random power node lying on the ground not too far away. Grab it, open the door, and inside the player will find a power node schematic and a semiconductor. Going back to the store, the player is able to trade the schematic to buy more power nodes, which cost just the amount that the semiconductor sells for, and thus allows the player to buy one extra power node to keep in stock. The player now knows that power nodes can not only upgrade weapons, but it is useful to keep at least one around in order to open these occasionally locked doors with hidden treasures. Tutorials aren't going to be going away anytime soon. Thanks to the rise of digital distribution and corporate desire to cut costs, instruction manuals are a thing of the past, not to mention that these days no one reads them anyway. However, developers have been improving in the ways they go about teaching a player the basics of playing a game. Most importantly, a lot of developers are putting more time and effort into teaching more complex game mechanics without having to say a single word, and those sorts of tutorials are the best sort.
Syncopation, it simply makes me wanna dance, dance, dance. Operation, I play this game as a child. You always try to touch the side